My husband quietly packed his suitcase and walked out. 30 minutes later, a photo appeared. He was on a plane, kissing his assistant, Rachel. The message said, "Goodbye, loser. I'm leaving you with nothing." I just smiled. He didn't know that 15 minutes before he left, I had already made one call. The morning was dim. The kind of gray, overcast Portland morning that felt like the city was still holding its breath. The kind of quiet that always seemed to stretch longer than it should. I woke to the sound of the old floorboards creaking, but it wasn't the sound of footsteps that caught my attention. It was the way Gerald's breathing had changed. Subtle, unmistakable. Quick, shallow breaths, as if he were swallowing panic with every exhale. I didn't open my eyes, didn't move a muscle. I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening. I could feel the space beside me, cold and empty, where he had been just moments before. His side of the bed had already cooled, and I didn't even need to look to know that he was up, moving around the room, trying to be as quiet as possible. It wasn't the first time he'd done this. He was good at slipping away when he thought I was asleep. Good at pretending he wasn't planning to leave. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't going to let it be another round of pretending. I wasn't going to be the one left holding the pieces of a life that had never belonged to me. I stayed still, listening to the rhythm of his movements, the rustle of clothes, the soft thud of his suitcase being pulled off the floor. The same suitcase he'd dragged across airports for years, the one he used to pack his life into every time he went on one of his countless business trips. He never asked me to join him on those trips anymore. In fact, he never even suggested it. The last time we'd gone anywhere together had been 5 years ago. A weekend getaway to the coast that felt more like a chore than a vacation. Since then, it had all been work, silence, and a slow erosion of whatever we had once shared. I heard him zip up the suitcase. Then the soft click of the door as he eased it shut behind him. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't move. I heard the faint sound of his footsteps as he walked down the hallway, then the soft thud of the front door closing behind him. I let the silence stretch for a moment, my breath steady, my heartbeat slow and even. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for without realizing it. I didn't rush to follow him. There was no need. I knew where he was headed. The SUV was already parked outside, its headlights dimmed under the soft glow of the streetlight. I watched him from the window as he walked across the lawn, the suitcase in his hand. His steps were quick, purposeful. As if he couldn't wait to leave, as if he thought I might stop him. He never once looked back at the house, not even a glance. He just slammed the door of the SUV, climbed in, and pulled away from the curb. I watched the brake lights fade into the distance, the same way I had watched him slip away from me countless times before. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't feel relief. I felt nothing but a strange emptiness that seemed to settle over me like fog. I remained where I was, standing by the window, arms crossed, waiting. After all, there was still one more thing I had to do. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed. The message was from an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I didn't hesitate. I walked over and tapped the screen, watching as the photo filled the display. Gerald, sitting on a plane, his arm around Rachel, a smug, triumphant look on her face as she leaned into him. The caption beneath the photo was clear and cold. "Goodbye, loser. I'm leaving you with nothing." For a long second, I stared at the screen, my face expressionless. There was no anger, no heartbreak, just a kind of sharp, cold clarity. My lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He had no idea that everything he thought he was taking with him had already slipped away. Not just the money, not just the business, but the part of me he had always underestimated, the part that had always known. I had already made one call. Elena sat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in her hand. The photo on the screen blurred slightly as her gaze fixed on it. There they were, Gerald and Rachel. It wasn't just the image that struck her, it was the ease of it, the casualness with which he kissed her. He looked like a man who had already made peace with his choices, a man who had long ago let go of whatever they had once built. She had been his wife, and now she was the woman left behind. She put the phone down slowly, her hands steady despite the tumult swirling inside. The message that came with the picture echoed in her mind. "Goodbye, loser. I'm leaving you with nothing." She didn't feel the sting that she expected. The betrayal was old news. She had known for months now that something had shifted, that he was slipping away, his focus turning to someone else, his affection drained by years of routine and indifference. It had become a slow unraveling, like the fraying of a thread in a sweater, unnoticed at first, but then suddenly undeniable. Elena had seen the signs long before the photo came. A perfume she didn't wear on the collar of his jacket. A dinner receipt from a fancy restaurant, tucked carelessly in his coat pocket. Late nights spent, working, but never really explaining what that work entailed. And then there was the moment in the shower when she found his phone unlocked. She hadn't planned to snoop. It wasn't the first time he'd left it within her reach, but something in her gut had told her to check. She had found messages, hundreds of them, filled with flirtation, explicit affection, and plans with Rachel. Plans to take the money, take the business, and leave her with nothing. But this photo, this last little message from him, was the final confirmation. The moment she knew for sure. It wasn't his words that hurt. Those had long lost their power. But the realization that he thought he was the one in control. He thought he could walk away and leave her in the ruins. What he didn't realize was that she had already made her move. 15 minutes before he had walked out the door, Elena had called Marcus, her lawyer. She had taken the first steps to ensure that when he left, he wouldn't be taking anything with him. Nothing but the mess he'd created. She stood up, the floor creaking under her feet as she moved across the room. The cool Portland air drifted in through the window, the city's quiet hum blending with the soft drizzle outside. Her eyes lingered on the empty space by the door, the place where Gerald had stood just a few moments ago, suitcase in hand. It wasn't the first time he'd tried to escape. It wasn't even the first time he'd threatened to leave her. But this time, it felt different. This time, he hadn't just walked away, he had left everything behind, including any hope of salvaging their marriage. Elena moved to the window, watching as the gray SUV pulled away from the curb. She didn't feel the sting of loss, only a strange sense of clarity. The fog outside seemed to settle around her, matching the stillness in her chest. For so long, she had been the silent one, the one who made excuses, who kept everything together, but not anymore. Gerald had made his choice, and she had made hers. The phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. Elena didn't need to look to know it was him. She picked it up, her fingers brushing over the screen, and found another message. This one was from a blocked number. It was short, sharp, and filled with a finality that made her lips curl into a faint smile. "I'm done. You're not getting anything. Goodbye." She put the phone down and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't the photo or the words that stung. It was the fact that, for the first time, Elena truly realized how little Gerald had understood her. He thought he was in control, that he could just walk away and leave her with nothing. What he didn't realize was that, just like her, he had already given up everything. Elena sat in the kitchen, the silence pressing in around her. The phone was still lying on the table, the image of Gerald and Rachel staring back at her, frozen on the screen. The photo had been a slap in the face. But it wasn't the first time she'd felt like this. The betrayal had been brewing for months, maybe even years, and she had been too caught up in the routine to notice. Or maybe, she had known and just kept pushing it aside. Whatever the reason, now it was real. Now, it was in front of her. She reached for the phone and scrolled through the messages again, her fingers moving slowly. The words, "Goodbye, loser. I'm leaving you with nothing," still rang in her ears. But this time, they didn't sting. There was no burning in her chest, no tightness in her throat. Instead, there was just a strange calmness, as if the storm had passed and left her with nothing but the aftermath to deal with. But even in that calm, Elena could feel the shift inside herself. She had seen this coming for so long, even when she hadn't wanted to admit it. The late nights, The unexplained absences, the casual dismissals. They had all pointed to this moment, and in a way she was almost relieved. Relieved that it was finally over. She wasn't surprised by what he had done. She was only surprised that it had taken this long for him to go. She stood up and moved toward the window, staring out at the street below. The gray Portland morning had settled into an almost peaceful drizzle, the kind that made the world feel small and distant. Gerald was gone now, driving off with Rachel, likely never to return. But Elena was still here. And for the first time, in what felt like forever, she wasn't afraid. There had been so many mornings like this one, when she had woken up to the sound of Gerald's breathing, to the feeling of him next to her, but not with her. The years of walking around him, of hiding her own needs, had drained her. He had worn her down, piece by piece, with his subtle dismissals and quiet insults. She had grown used to it, had learned to shrink herself, to make herself smaller so he wouldn't be irritated. But now, as she stood by the window, watching the world go by, Elena could feel something new inside her. Something had shifted, like a lock finally clicking into place. She wasn't going to shrink anymore. She wasn't going to make herself invisible for him, or anyone else. The life she had been living, the one she had spent so long trying to maintain for the sake of their family, was over. It was gone the moment he left. And with his departure, she realized that she had been living in the shadow of a man who had never truly seen her. She moved across the room to the kitchen counter, where her phone sat, still buzzing with unanswered calls and messages. She didn't bother reading them. She already knew what they would say. Gerald's frantic attempts to reach her, to explain, to manipulate her to believing that he was the one who had been wrong. But Elena wasn't interested in hearing his excuses anymore. She had heard them all before, and they were always the same. Instead, she picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before the familiar voice on the other end answered. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady, calm. "I need you to start the paperwork. I want everything in my name. All of it." There was a pause on the other end, then Marcus's voice, tinged with approval, replied. "You're sure about this?" "I'm sure," Elena said, her grip tightening on the phone. "I'm done letting him take everything from me. I'm done being his afterthought. He's not taking anything else from me, not my business, not my life, not my dignity. This ends now." Marcus's voice softened. "All right. I'll have the papers ready. I'll get it done. Elena, we'll make sure he doesn't get a cent." She hung up the phone and set it back on the counter, feeling the weight of her decision settle over her like a warm blanket. This was the first time in years she had felt like she was making a decision for herself, not for anyone else. She wasn't going to wait around for Gerald to finish destroying what they had built. She wasn't going to wait for him to take what was left of her. Elena moved toward the window again, watching as the rain fell in soft sheets, blurring the world outside. She could feel the tension in her shoulders start to ease. The silence in the house felt different now up here, but in a way, more freeing. It was as if the space had finally been cleared, and she could breathe again. The phone buzzed again, but this time, Elena didn't pick it up. She didn't need to hear from him. She didn't need to listen to his voice anymore, full of excuses and false promises. She was done. Done with the lies, done with the silence, done with being second to someone who didn't care enough to even try. For the first time in a long time, Elena felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. It wasn't relief, exactly, but something close to it, a quiet acceptance of what had happened, and what was to come. She wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't waiting for someone to change, to fix things, to make everything right. She was standing in her own life, ready to face whatever came next. And this time, she wouldn't be doing it for anyone but herself. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the phone still sitting in front of her, glowing softly in the dim morning light. Her fingers hovered over it, but she didn't pick it up. She could already feel the weight of what was coming next. Gerald, her husband, had left, taking with him the final thread of a life she had spent years trying to piece together. The betrayal didn't sting as much as she thought it would, Instead, it felt like the last act of a play she had long ago memorized. It wasn't new, not really. The disappointment, the lies, the indifference. It had all been there for a long time, hiding beneath the surface of their marriage, and she had been too afraid to see it. But now, with the photo still burning in her mind, Elena could feel a shift inside her. Something that had been dormant for years, waiting for the right moment, had finally stirred to life. She wasn't sad. She wasn't angry. She was resigned. And yet, for the first time in ages, there was a spark of something elsey determination. Gerald had made his choice. He had left her for his assistant, Rachel, and he thought he could take everything with him. But what he didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that Elena had already made the first move. She picked up the phone then, her fingers moving with purpose as she dialed Marcus's number. The line rang once, then twice before he answered. Marcus, Elena said, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that she had never felt before. I need you to start the paperwork. I want everything in my name. All of it. There was a pause, a brief moment of silence on the other end, before Marcus spoke again, his voice low but filled with approval. You're sure about this? I'm sure, she replied, her grip on the phone tightening. I'm done letting him take everything from me. I'm done being his afterthought. He's not taking anything else from me, not my business, not my life, not my dignity. This ends now. Marcus's voice softened. All right, I'll have the papers ready. We'll make sure he doesn't get a cent. Elena hung up the phone, setting it back on the table, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The sound of rain tapping softly against the window filled the room. The gentle rhythm, a soothing counterpoint to the noise in her mind. For so many years, she had been the one who took care of everything. The one who stayed quiet when Gerald belittled her, when he took credit for the work she did behind the scenes, when he spent more time with Rachel than with her. But that was over. She stood up, moving to the window and looking out at the gray morning. The world outside was quiet, shrouded in a soft mist that seemed to mirror the fog in her mind. But even in the midst of the grayness, there was a sense of clarity that had eluded her for so long. She wasn't going to wait around for Gerald anymore. She wasn't going to spend another day trying to hold there something that had already fallen apart. It was time to move on, time to take control of her life. Elena let the silence settle over her like a blanket, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. The business, the house, everything she had worked for, she would make sure it was all hers. Gerald had left her with nothing but his empty promises, but he didn't realize that she had already been planning for this moment. He was gone. And now, Elena was free. The phone buzzed again, but this time she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Whatever Gerald had to say wasn't going to change anything. She had already made her decision, and she was ready to face the future on her own terms. Turning away from the window, Elena walked toward the hallway, her footsteps steady and sure. The house felt different now. The silence wasn't oppressive. It wasn't the hollow quiet that had filled every corner when Gerald was around. No, this silence was different. It was hers. She moved through the rooms, her hands brushing lightly over the surfaces, over the things that had once been shared between them. She didn't feel sadness. She didn't feel regret. She only felt a quiet, steady resolve. She had already made the first step. Now, it was time for the rest of her life to begin. Elena sat down at her desk, the paperwork from Marcus spread out in front of her. The documents were thick, filled with legal terms and financial jargon, but she didn't mind. It felt almost like a ritual now, the act of reclaiming what was hers. With each page she signed, she could feel the weight of her decision settling deeper, anchoring her in a way she hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about taking the business back. It was about taking herself back. She glanced out the window, watching the rain fall in soft sheets against the glass. The city was quiet today, muted under the gray sky. The Portland streets, usually filled with the sounds of morning commuters, were now empty, just like her house. It felt different, though. Not lonely, but empty in a way that was cleansing. as if the space was finally being cleared for something new. Her fingers brushed the edge of the papers, and she paused, thinking about the call she had made this morning. To Marcus, yes, but also to herself. It wasn't just about securing the business or the financials. It was about securing her own future. Gerald had left her with nothing, or so he thought. But Elena knew better. She had seen the cracks in their marriage long before the affair started, long before Rachel came into the picture. The cracks had been there, buried under years of sacrifice and compromise, and now they were finally breaking open. Her mind drifted back to those early days. When they had first started Pierce Woodcrafts together, everything had felt possible. Gerald had been ambitious, driven, and Elena had been right there by his side, supporting him, building the company from the ground up. She had believed in the dream, in their dream. But over time, that dream had shifted. Gerald had changed. It wasn't just the affair. It was the way he had stopped seeing her, stopped caring for her. She had become invisible to him. Just a fixture in the background of his life, doing all the work while he took the credit. Now, as Elena signed the final document, something inside her snapped back into place. This was hers. The business was hers. And everything that came with it, the control, the power, the future, was hers too. She wasn't going to allow Gerald to take it from her, not now and not ever again. Elena stood up from the desk and walked over to the window again, the cool air from the rain filling the room. She looked down at the street below, where a few people hurried along, heads down, trying to avoid the rain. But she wasn't like them. She wasn't hiding from the world anymore. She was facing it, ready to take the next step. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was quiet, hesitant, and for a moment, Elena wondered if it was Gerald, trying to come back. But when she opened the door, it wasn't him. It was Jessica. "I thought you could use some company," Jessica said, her smile warm but laced with concern. She had been Elena's best friend for years, the one person who had always been there for her, even when Elena didn't know how to ask for help. Jessica stepped inside, wiping the rain from her jacket, and Elena stepped aside to let her in. "I thought I might find you here," Jessica continued, glancing at the papers on the table. "How are you doing?" Elena offered a faint smile. "I'm good. Just getting things in order." Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Getting things in order? You're taking back your business, Elena. You're making sure he doesn't get a penny. I think you're doing more than just getting things in order." Elena chuckled softly, but it wasn't a laugh that came from humor. It was the first real laugh she'd had in a while, one that felt like a release. "Maybe I am," she said quietly. "But it's time, Jessica. It's time I took control of my life again." Jessica nodded, her gaze softening as she looked at Elena. "You deserve this. You've been waiting for this moment for so long." Elena nodded slowly, her hands resting on the table. "I've been waiting. But now I'm not just waiting anymore. I'm doing." There was a moment of silence between them, and Jessica seemed to understand. She walked over and pulled out a chair, sitting across from Elena. "What's next?" Elena didn't hesitate. "Next, I start fresh. I rebuild everything. The business, myself, everything. This is mine now." Jessica smiled. "And I'll be right here, every step of the way. You don't have to do it alone." Elena's heart felt a little lighter at her friend's words. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. She felt like she could breathe again. She reached for her phone and dialed Marcus's number again, feeling the weight of the next steps settling around her. "It's done," she said when he picked up. "Make sure everything is locked down. I want to be in full control, no exceptions." Marcus's voice was approving. "You've got it. We're on it." Elena hung up the phone, looking at Jessica with a new sense of clarity. "This is it. No turning back." Jessica nodded. And that's exactly how it should be. For the first time in a long time, Elena didn't feel the fear that had followed her for years. She was done with the past. Now, she was ready for the future. And this time, the future was hers to shape. The days after Gerald left blurred together in a haze of numbness and quiet action. Elena went through the motions of her life, but everything felt different now. The house, once filled with the low hum of shared routines, felt strangely empty. She'd spent so many years adapting to his moods, shrinking herself to accommodate his indifference. But now she was left to reckon with what was left of her life. Her work, her identity, her few. She sat at the kitchen table one morning, the soft light filtering through the window, and tried to focus out on documents spread out in front of her. The papers from Marcus were there, but they didn't seem real yet. Everything was changing, but it felt almost like she was watching from the outside, unable to fully grasp the enormity of it. She'd always been the quiet one, the supportive one, the one who had made things work. But now, for the first time in years, Elena realized that she didn't have to make things work for anyone but herself. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text message from Jessica. "Hey, just checking in. How are you holding up?" Elena smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the edge of the phone. Jessica had been there for her for as long as she could remember, always the voice of reason when Elena couldn't see straight. She typed a quick reply, keeping it simple. "Doing okay. Just busy. Got a lot to sort through." Jessica responded almost immediately. "I know you're handling it, but if you need to talk or get out of the house, I'm here." Elena leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen for a moment. She'd had so many chances to talk to Jessica, to ask for help, but she always held back, thinking she could handle it on her own. But now, the thought of being alone with her thoughts was more than she could bear. Maybe it was time to stop pretending. She stood up and grabbed her coat, deciding to take a walk before the day pulled her back into its familiar rhythm. The air was chilly, but not uncomfortable, and the soft drizzle had started to fall again. Portland's gray skies felt like a second skin, the cool moisture settling on her skin as she walked through the quiet streets. It was strange how the city could feel so alive, yet so quiet. She thought about Gerald, about how he had walked out without even a second glance. It wasn't that she didn't know it was coming. She'd known for months, maybe longer. But it was different when it was finally real. The finality of it hit her like a wave. She wasn't angry, not yet. The anger was still waiting to come, still sitting just beneath the surface. But for now, she felt empty. She paused on the corner, looking at the street ahead, the faint sound of traffic in the distance. She could still hear his voice, still hear his words, still see the way he had looked at her in those final months. Like she was just a shadow, a nuisance. It had been so easy for him to walk away, so simple for him to leave everything behind. But for Elena, it wasn't simple. It never had been. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and turned back toward home, her mind still swirling with the remnants of their life together. The house was waiting for her when she returned, still empty, still quiet. She stepped inside and headed straight for the kitchen, reaching for the kettle to make some tea. The warmth of the cup in her hands was comforting, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt in weeks. Her phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call from Marcus. She answered it immediately. "Elena," he said, his voice steady. "I've got the papers. Everything is set up. You're the sole owner of the company now." A sense of finality settled over her. It wasn't about the business. It was about control, about taking back what was hers. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'll review them." She hung up the phone, the weight of it all still pressing down on her. But now, it was different. She wasn't holding everything together for someone else. She was doing it for herself. Elena walked back to the kitchen table, the documents waiting for her. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to go through them. With each signature, she felt the weight of the past years lifting, little by little. It wasn't just about the business. It was about reclaiming her life, her identity. The phone buzzed again, but this time, she didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. Gerald's calls, his messages, his attempts to manipulate her, they were all irrelevant now. She had already made her choice, and nothing was going to change that. The house felt different now. Not empty, but quiet in a way that she could finally breathe in. The past was behind her, and for the first time in years, Elena felt like she was standing in the space that was truly hers. She wasn't waiting for him anymore. She was moving forward. For the first time in so long, Elena allowed herself a moment of peace. Eyed the soft sound of rain tapping against the window as the world outside continued on. She had everything she needed now. And the future, for the first time, felt like it was hers to shape. Elena sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The soft, steady sound of it outside felt like a reflection of her mind, calm, but with an undercurrent of tension she couldn't quite shake. The weight of the past few days had left her feeling exhausted, yet something in her stirred with anticipation. She had taken the first steps, secured the business, but that was only the beginning. The real work was just starting. Her phone buzzed again. It had been nonstop since Gerald left messages, calls, emails, all from people who thought they could reach her now that he was gone. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. She had already moved on from the world that had once revolved around him. Elena had always been the one who kept things together, the one who handled the finances, the business, the home. All of it had been a balancing act. A delicate dance that kept their life from falling apart. But now, it felt as though everything was shifting into place on its own. She wasn't trying to hold everything together anymore. The pieces had already been set in motion. She stood up from the table, walked to the kitchen, and began brewing herself a cup of tea. The smell of mint filled the room as the kettle whistled, a small moment of peace in the midst of the chaos she was sorting through. Elena had always loved tea. The way the warmth of it could soothe her on the coldest of mornings. She had spent so many mornings, trying to make things work with Gerald, making breakfast, keeping the house in order, playing the role of the dutiful wife. But now, with each small action, Elena was reclaiming herself. She was stepping into the life she had put on hold for too long. As she sipped her tea, Elena's thoughts drifted to the future. There was so much to do, so much to rebuild, but for the first time, it didn't seem impossible. She had taken control of Pierce Woodcrafts, and she would make sure it flourished without Gerald's interference. It had been her work, her dedication, from the beginning. She wasn't going to let him destroy it, or her any longer. The rain was still falling. The soft tap of droplets against the window, a reminder of how things had changed. She could feel it in her bones now, the difference between who she had been and who she was becoming. The woman who had stayed silent, who had let herself be pushed aside, was gone. She was still here, but different, stronger, more in control. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her lawyer, Marcus. Elena picked it up, her fingers moving quickly as she read the words. All transfers are complete. The business is officially yours. Nothing left for him to claim. It's done. A wave of relief washed over her, but it wasn't the kind of relief she had expected. It wasn't the relief of someone who had been saved. It was the satisfaction of someone who had done what needed to be done. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She put the phone down and looked around the room. The house felt different. It had been a place of quiet tension for so long, a place where she had walked on eggshells, never knowing if Gerald would lash out, or if the next argument would be the one that broke everything. But now, it felt like a blank canvas, waiting for her to fill it with her own choices, her own dreams. Elena finished her tea and stood, feeling the warmth spread through her as she walked toward the door. She didn't know where the path ahead would lead, but for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid. There were still challenges ahead, facing clients, rebuilding relationships, figuring out how to navigate the aftermath of everything Gerald had left behind. But Elena knew she was ready. She had to be. There was no other option. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside, the rain still falling, but the world feeling somehow brighter. As she walked down the street, the weight on her shoulders was gone. It wasn't just the business she had reclaimed, it was her own sense of self. She wasn't just the woman who had been married to Gerald Pierce. She was Elena, strong and capable, and for the first time in years, she felt like she was exactly where she was meant to be. The streets were quiet, the sound of her footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. She had taken back control of her life. And now, it was time to move forward, step by step, knowing that she was no longer waiting for anyone else to decide her fate. She was the one in charge now. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her. The phone buzzed again, and for a brief moment, Elena hesitated. She had been avoiding it all morning, Gerald's calls, his voicemails, the unrelenting attempts to pull her back into his tangled web of excuses. She had already heard it all before. But this time, she picked up the phone. Her finger hovered over the screen, and she looked down at his name flashing on the display. She didn't answer. Instead, she opened his voicemail. She listened as his voice crackled through the speaker, thick with desperation. "Elena, I don't know what's happening, but you can't just take everything. I need you to understand, I didn't want this to happen. You have to believe me." His words were the same as always. The same manipulation, the same excuses. The same cry for mercy. Elena clenched her jaw, her thumb hovering over the delete button. She had spent years forgiving him, bending over backward to make their marriage work, to make their life to something he could respect. But he never respected her. Not once. She hit delete, letting the voicemail vanish into the digital ether. The finality of it settled over her like a blanket. There would be no more chances. No more forgiveness. No more pretending. Elena stood and walked to the kitchen, the rhythmic sound of rain tapping against the window as a quiet backdrop. She was alone now, but there was no fear in the solitude. It was just space to breathe, to think, to heal. She reached for the kettle and poured hot water over a tea bag, letting the warm steam fill the room. The scent of chamomile and mint swirled in the air, a calming balm after the storm of the past few days. The world outside was a blur of gray, but inside, Elena felt something begin to shift. She had spent so much time, holding on to the pieces of a broken life, trying to make them fit together, trying to build something that had never really been there. Gerald had taken everything from her, her peace, her confidence, her sense of self, but now it was hers again. Her fingers traced the edge of the mug, the warmth grounding her. The business was hers now, legally. The house, her sanctuary. But it wasn't just the things that had changed, it was her. For the first time, Elena felt like she was in control. She wasn't hiding behind a mask of duty or sacrifice anymore. She was standing up for herself, taking what was rightfully hers. Her phone buzzed again, this time a message from Jessica. "How are you holding up?" The text read. Elena smiled faintly. Jessica had always been there for her, but now, Elena realized, she was standing on her own. She tapped out a response. "I'm good. Just figuring it out, one step at a time." She put the phone down and walked over to the window again, looking out at the world. It was rainy gray, just like the days that had led her here. But she didn't feel the weight of it anymore. She felt a sense of peace. A quiet resolve that she hadn't known she was capable of. The rain continued to fall, and for the first time in years, Elena wasn't waiting for someone to save her. She was saving herself.